Hey, everybody, welcome to another special edition of Brilliantly Resilient Live. I'm Kristen Smedley here with my buddy Mary Fran Bontempo, and we are bringing you another special hour of, I guess, a deep dive is what it really is into a topic that lots of folks, especially as we're creating this in December, are dealing with the different stages of addiction and recovery. Plus, we're in the middle of the pandemic and a lockdown. Plus, we are in the middle of holidays not looking like they typically do, and the end of a very long, incredibly different year. So, all that to say, there's been a lot of triggers in 2020, and especially right now this time of year. So we thought it'd be a good time to talk about this now, because this is a topic that lots of folks are dealing with all year long, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's holidays and whatnot. So we thought it's a good time to grab some good friends of ours that have been on this journey in different ways, different points of view, to give some tools, strategies, and stories to help you reset, rise, and reveal your brilliance as you are managing, or a family member or friend are managing, an addiction recovery story. So we're going to have everybody introduce themselves. Now, I know that those of you that follow the show and the podcast know Mary Fran Bontempo as my co-host and partner in crazy crime here on the airwaves. But let's hear, Mary Fran's going to introduce herself tonight in relative to the topic that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I am Mary Fran Bontempo, and as Kristen said, her partner in all of this. And I think the thing that's most notable about this is that everything that I'm doing now really had its germination and the beginnings of it at a time that was very dark in my life, when my son was in the throes of heroin addiction and alcoholism and substance abuse. So where I am now, and this is part of the whole Brilliantly Resilient strategy, started because I made a decision that I wasn't going to live in that place and allow that experience to define the rest of my life. That didn't mean I had answers, but it did start with that decision to not let David's story be my only story. Certainly was a part of it. But everything that I do now had its beginnings at that time. And it's all about now trying to help people have the tools and the skills and the things that I didn't have. And Kristen and I have said this often, that we want to be the resource for people that we didn't have when we were going through our struggles. So that's my place in this presentation tonight.
Awesome. And I'm so happy that you framed all of it about how your work is and from where all of it comes from, because I don't know that everybody that follows knows that whole thing. And there's so many new people tuning in tonight specifically for this topic. So thanks for doing that. Okay, next up we have Eric Kreminger. Eric, give us a shout out. Let us know what you got going on in the world.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. Basically, I think I'll be able to add the most value tonight. I'm a person in long-term recovery. So for about a decade, I was just devastated myself, my family devastated by addiction. August 4th, 2010 is when I kind of began my recovery journey. I really had taken an interest in the brain, and I was diagnosed with a brain disorder, and nobody really explained to me what the underlying processes were that activated the brain. So I felt very disempowered for years during my addiction. From that experience, I got very interested in how the brain works with certain behaviors and how we could reclaim the brain. If addiction hijacks the brain, how can we reclaim it? Basically went to Drexel University, got a degree in psychology with a focus on behavioral neuroscience. Postgraduate, completed Penn Medicine's mindfulness-based stress reduction program and Villanova's counseling program to hopefully put myself in a position where I could really enlighten people to certain things that they have complete control over and they can do to reclaim that hijacked brain. So that's what my passion is, and I'm very excited for the opportunity to be here tonight and discuss some of that.
Well, thanks so much for articulating all that. And I have to tell you, when Mary Fran sent me your bio and that you had connected, you and Dave know each other, and then he recommended that you come on for this with us. And I read it and I thought, oh my gosh, we have learned so much here at Brilliantly Resilient from folks that have studied the brain. And I think that that's important to highlight, that, at least for me, it really gave me it's not an excuse. That's not the word. It gave me some relief to know that there are things happening in my brain that I'm not aware of. It's not about I'm making bad choices or I'm just stuck or something. There are some connections there that are important to know about. And that started to change things for me in terms of my journey in resilience. So I'm so happy that you're here to give us that info. All right. And then we have Dave Bontempo. What's up, Dave? Let us know what you're up to in the world.
So thank you very much for having me. Eric is a good friend of mine, and you know, the things that he's taught me have really resonated through just learning, you know, mindfulness, meditation, positive visualization, and all those things that I've tried to evolve. So I mean, it started, you know, early growing up with the addiction to toys, candy, this, that, or the other thing. And, you know, I suffered for a long time with drug addiction. I got clean and sober August 21st, 2011. So I had 9 years in August. And I've been working in the behavioral health field for probably almost as long as that. I'm on the outreach team at a treatment center called Dream Life. And every day I kind of don't know what's coming, but a family usually calls me with some sort of how do I get myself or my kid or my loved one out of something. And so, you know, it's been a crazy journey to be a part of it. It's been a crazy blessing that, like, when I got clean, I was a single kid that, you know, didn't have two dimes to rub together, and now I'm a father of three. I'm married, and have gotten a lot of blessings. And I like to joke that I'm the only one of my mom's kids that she wrote a book about, and so that makes me more important than my sisters.
Not anything you should be bragging about, son. Just want to put that out there.
Just saying.
Hey, I think it's t-shirt worthy. I'm the only one of my mom's kids that she wrote a book about. I say go for it. That's good stuff.
Good t-shirt.
All right, good. Well, thanks for being here, Dave. And I have to tell you, because I have to just nerd out for a little bit and tell you how magnificent it is when Mary Fran and I do all of our speeches, and now it's, you know, things on Zoom, and we do our presentation of the whole Brilliantly Resilient formula, that we're going to dive into just a few pieces of it tonight and get your guys' perspective on how this relates to the addiction and recovery journey. We realized that we needed to add into that whole slide deck, if you will, and presentation, where they are now. We talk about my boys with blindness and where they are now after a hard journey for me as a mom, and where you are now after Mary Fran talks about all the stuff that you guys went through. And when we see the picture of you and your family, it is just extraordinary. And the whole place just goes wild, all the people that watch, because it is a struggle. And it really gives, this is why I want everybody to realize tonight, some of the story, a lot of the stories that you're going to hear are hard, and there are hard pieces that we're not going to deep dive into all of it. You're going to hear the stories and strategies of rising, but the light at the end of the tunnel, and it looks different for all of you, which is magnificent too. It's what is your journey and your story and your mountain that you get to at the end, at the top. But it's magnificent that you all have been through this in a way that you're able to share now, and you have such extraordinary, I don't want to say endings to the story, because you're all still in the middle, but you're at a chapter now that is wonderful to see. So in that, knowing that, look, everybody, knowing that is like a good story now, we're gonna go back a little bit to some of the struggles, and we're gonna bounce back and forth. So buckle your seatbelt. I am in charge of the agenda, which is always a good time, and it makes Mary Fran sweat, which is always fun for me. Okay, so let's start with this. Like I said, we're going to go through a few of the chunks of the Brilliantly Resilient formula in Reset, Rise, and Reveal Your Brilliance. But let's stick a little bit in the resetting. When that sucker punch hits, when you realize that, you know, the family realizes they've got an issue, or your friends or whoever's around you realizing they've got this addiction issue to deal with, and you yourself have realized that you've got this addiction issue to deal with. Here's the struggle that we want to get into a little bit. We talk in Brilliantly Resilient about resetting with what are your values? What is your perception of what's happening in your journey, and what are the controllables that you can control? Those are the three things that we look at in resetting. But just thinking about values, like to come from your place of values to be able to reset your mindset in your life. How do you do that? Or how would you suggest that people do that when you've got an addict may have a completely different set of values at that point in time than the family that they're living with or impacting? Anyone have some intel on that?
I mean, I can certainly say that for me as the parent, that was one of the biggest struggles, because you as the parent who are clear-headed, you've raised a child a certain way with a certain set of familial values, with a certain, you think a value system or whatever. And then the addicted brain, which I'm sure Eric can comment on, is completely focused on the need for the fix. So there is no common ground there. And that for me was the hardest part. You look at your kid and that they know that this is terrible for them, but they can't stop. Or we think, at least initially, the parent thinks they won't stop. So that for me was one of the hardest parts to struggle. Like, how is this kid who is so smart and was such a great kid, how does he not see this? So I would be interested to hear what both Eric and David, like what their perception was on that. And how do you even begin to address that issue as the parent, like as the person who's trying to be supportive when you guys are not talking on the same wavelengths?
Yeah, I could speak to that a little bit. And so we're just so I'm clear, we're talking about somebody who's actively using, who's coming home for the holidays, or are we talking somebody recently in recovery? Because there's kind of different stages, just looking at my own journey. So when I was kind of actively using, and of course, my family wanted me home for the holidays, and I was instilled with a tremendous set of values. And one of the most painful experiences for me internally was, as my addiction progressed, I got further and further away from that value system without understanding that there is a neurobiological process. Like, addiction does indeed hijack the reward pathway. It's called the mesolimbic pathway. And you start running on this compulsive loop where you just need more. And the drugs it's called saliency. Like, that's all that you could think about at a certain level with addiction. At the same time, you're in your home environment, it's Christmas, you remember your value system. It's a very painful experience.
Wow.
So painful, in fact, you want to get high. That actually starts a cycle, ironically enough. So from that perspective, it's just about recognizing, trying to have a conversation and hopefully having some sort of support, because it's going to be difficult for the family, but it's equally as difficult and confusing for the person with the substance use disorder.
Yeah,
Wow.
I think the same thing. I mean, I remember like being excited to like go to my grandparents' house and like take the Christmas tree down from the attic, but having to get high before I went over, and like feeling like I had a purpose for that hour, which was exciting. And it was like I'm very much like the holidays always have, but you feel this void that like they probably know, but do they not really know what's going on? And just having to not be fully present. Where am I going to run out? Or I mean, there was a Christmas Eve, Mom, I'm sure you remember, like when I went out like all hours of the night, like they didn't come home, and I was smashed. There was different times where like you tried so hard to like be a part of a tradition, when you weren't really like, you weren't really there, and everyone knew that, but like your thought was probably like, well, at least he's not dead, which is like as serious as it can be. And I think like when you come home like sober, like the first year, I mean, I was more comfortable at sobriety group, at like I stayed there Christmas Eve pretty much all night than I was in my grandma's house that I'd been at for 26 years. And I seen a lot of people try and forget the work that they have to do to stay sober during the holidays, and like let their guard down, like not go to a meeting on Christmas Eve or whatever it is, and like that takes you out. And it's easy to stay sober, at least in my opinion, on Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Eve, and Christmas, because all eyes are on you. And it's, the relapse is the day, like Black Friday and December 26th, when things let up a little bit, are there. And I think that, you want so badly to feel like connected to the tradition, but knowing how disconnected you are, that it's a whirlwind. All you can think about is like, once I get high, then I can, sit in the family room and watch Rudolph with my family. But until then, like, I'm not gonna be around.
Wow. So that's interesting for me. And it may be for other people that are watching, because had always thought, different family members having addiction issues, that it was more like they didn't want any parts of our value system and traditions. And it was like, oh, if I have to deal with this, then, and you're saying it's different. It's actually a struggle that is important to you, but you didn't know how to deal with that, and felt maybe guilt or pain or something, but not in a way that I was thinking, that like, I just don't want any parts of this family and this stuff.
I think it's the exact opposite. You want it so badly, but you're so hooked on the drug that you feel so disconnected that then you develop a chip on your shoulder and you become rude and angry.
Yep.
But as much as I like claimed, like, my dad doesn't get it, or he's a square and stuff like that, like I turned into him now. So it's, so badly, I think you want to feel that way, and you kind of wonder like, what is this void that I feel and stuff like that. But I always talked about being like a counterculture kid and hating authority and all that, but it was just because I thought like I wasn't good enough, or I wouldn't measure up to that. So instead of like working hard, I would just make fun of it.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. So value systems, belief systems, we're taught that at a very young age when our brain is forming. So you don't just turn those around. Addiction isn't a set of values. It's habit, behaviors. So you behave in a certain way that they become habitual, all based around drug seeking and using. That wasn't my value system. That was an illness. That was a disease. And I would come home, but I would be reminded I have this incredible family. I knew that I had the value. I believed this stuff, but I just couldn't act in accordance with those values. And that caused, a lot of discontent and shame. And that shame made me want to use, and then that deepened the behavior of the addicted behavior, which made me even further away from that value system, which made me want to use again. And that's what they call that vicious cycle. I literally just described the vicious cycle, and it is horrific. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy.
Wow. So let me ask you this, and I'm going to go off of our thing a little bit, but I'll come back to it. So in terms of what then, and there may not be an answer to this, what can a family member do when someone is in that cycle of they want to be so much a part of what the family has going on, but they don't feel good enough, and they're using and all of that? I think a lot of parents tend to have a big old speech and intervention that isn't the time to do it. Or what does a parent do at that point? Do they let them spiral? Do they still invite them over? Do they tell them to go away until they get their act together? What are some steps what can the family control in that situation?
I'd like the answer to that, please. I didn't know what
500, Alex.
yeah. Help for 500. I didn't know what to do. And it's an excellent question, because when he was using, you want to grab the kid and hug him and tell him no, and you want to bitch slap him at the same time. So you really just don't know. You don't know what to do. You just don't. I mean, I think it's a little different when they get into early sobriety, and I know we're going to touch on that eventually, but I'd love to hear your answers to that.
I mean, I think personally for me, like you guys kind of did it. Like you can't change your value system to accommodate self-destructive behavior. And it was like, as much as I hated that during it, like, I mean, like a buddy of mine who's a clinician always says parents always taught don't enable. And that's like, telling a top not to spin. Like, okay, fine, I won't enable. But if that's all they know how to do, parents are control freaks and they see their kids screwed up, they're going to try something. So it's like enable wellness, enable recovery. And like, that's like a lot of what I think Eric talks about and what I learned from him. But I think the biggest thing is like not sacrificing, your value system to like, all right, like I expect this from your sisters, like, but you're a drug addict, so like you can only do this much and that's okay. Um, I think, not changing who you are, and you said that all the time, like we're not going to change who we are for you to be a part of the family. You're going to have to change, and like that sucks and it's hard, but the people that work hard get it.
Wow.
Oh, I did something right. Oh.
It was Dad's idea.
I'll tell you what, dude, none of it was Dad's idea.
Oh, Eric, anything to add in that one, or is that pretty much the same?
I honestly, it's a really a case by case kind of scenario. There's a lot of variables that would kind of, lead to you wanting to act in a different way. I agree with, what Dave and what the clinician said. The word enabling, and you could have a great boundary strategy, but at the end of the day, like, you raise this person, right? There's at one point with a mother and a son or daughter, there was an umbilical cord. Like, you biologically, boundaries, this stuff is cognitive. The I need to protect this cub is limbic, it's deep, it's biological, it's nervous system. So the best thing that you can do is get a good night's sleep beforehand. Prepare your nervous system to navigate a very difficult scenario.
That is such great advice, because I did find that, and I didn't realize it at the time, but self-care did become a big part of my routine, but only because it was self-preservation, only because if I didn't sleep, and also that was the one time that I wasn't worried. So like, I really held on to my sleep whenever I could. I napped in the afternoon if I could, just to get those periods where I wasn't terrified.
Yeah.
But also to recharge. So I think that is great advice, because when somebody's in the middle of addiction, you're not going to talk them out of it. You're not going to change it. You're not going to fix it. They have to be ready to make those steps. So if you are going to invite that person back into your home or into your life or into your family, you have to be ready, like you so eloquently put it, Eric, for a tough time. If you're going to invite them in, you can't expect them to act the way you want them to act. They're just not gonna.
So that's interesting, because you guys just answered what my next question was. In our Brilliantly Resilient formula, one of the things is you got to look at what you can control the controllables, is what we say. And as I was going through this, I got to be honest, before we started, coming into the Zoom room, I'm thinking, control the controllables. I've seen the madness that goes on. Like, there is no control. And I'm thinking, no, there's none of that. Let's skip it. But what you're saying is, and this is very enlightening to me in every point of being brilliantly resilient: divorce, addiction, job loss, pandemic, any sucker punch, there are things you can control. And you're saying you can control whether you're going into the situation fully loaded and healthy, like fully, okay, I did everything I could. I got my good night's sleep. They know my value system because I raised them well, all these things. And you can't just pray it away and get mad that it's still happening. So there are things you can control. I love that. Get a good night's sleep is a very good thing that you can do to be ready for that situation. Okay.
Kristen, I think we say, controlling what you can control does not mean curing it, and does not mean making it go away. It just means, how can you go into that situation at your optimum level to deal with it? And that's probably the best thing that you can do as somebody in the support network, because it's going to be rough.
Love it. Okay, now let's move into, I'm looking at the time too, which I have all these challenges that are making me like, okay, we got this. I got this. I won't go off into the weeds and keep us here for 7 hours. Let's go into the rise now. Let's go into the things that we talk about when you have the sucker punch, you're dealing with all of the addiction issues, you're grappling with everything. And now we've explored the reset. What about, this is where I think everybody really wants to have the give us all the answers, because we're counting on you, no pressure. No, that rise part, when you start to realize that you're making that turn to get out of this. You're starting to change into, you are on the way out. And we always say that it starts with one action step, one thing. Actually, I'll back up. It starts for us with making the choice that you're not gonna live there, and you're gonna take one action step. Do you guys have a spot? And I know a little bit about Dave's story, so I'll let him tell it though. But do you have a spot in your journey where you just like, did you wake up one day and say, today's the day, I'm done with this and I'm moving forward and here's how I'm going to do it? Or was it a little bit, someone knock you over the head? What was that? Do you have a spot in your journey that became that turning point?
Eric, do you want to go or do you want me to jump in?
I'm sure. I mean, I do. It's a definitive date. I could tell you exactly. It was August 4th, 2010. I'll never forget it. I was I was just released from Delaware County Prison for yet another DUI, another possession charge, and that's what my life had become, a series of working very hard to get things, only to lose them all as a result of my addiction. And I was homeless. I was just released. I was laying on a bench in right here in Center City, Philadelphia, at City Hall, laying on a bench. And I'm looking up at this, there's a statue of William Penn on top of City Hall. And I'm looking up at this statue thinking, what have I done to my life, man? And just like the feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, I could still tap into those. I'm grateful for that. But the way that I describe it is like, my internal psyche couldn't take any more of the, Eric, you're a loser, you're a junkie, what's wrong with you? This is the stuff I used to say to myself on repeat. And my psyche was just, I like the word surrendered. It just surrendered. And then my physical body couldn't take any more of the drinking, the drugs, the not sleeping, the poor nutrition, everything that comes with that quote addict lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And my physical body just surrendered. And I like to describe it, the intersection of my psyche surrendering and my physical body surrendering kind of allowed for a higher consciousness to step in. And I just felt a shift inside of me. And that shift put me in a position where I could trust somebody and ask for help. For me, that looked like a 12-step program. And at the same time that I started a 12-step program, I began a meditation practice called Ascension Meditation, which was it's a cognitive meditation where when you have a negative thought, you insert a different thought. So it was very apropos for somebody who had what they call the monkey mind in meditation, which early recovery I had for several years. So those two things from an action step, number one, kind of a divine intervention that allowed me to ask for help. I would guess in that the action step was to ask for help and be willing to receive the help.
And be willing to receive it. I love that. Dave, how about for you?
I think I make it sound far less educated, but I don't know. I mean, I think like the first thing that we talked about with like the rise and those kind of things, like my biggest feeling on that is like, don't buy into your hype and don't look around too much, because like the second you start to like analyze that and compare yourself to other people and all that stuff, like it's just in for more, of the mindlessness that Eric was just speaking about. I think the time that I got sober, I mean, there was things that were out of my control that I was like confronted with, some like behaviors and stealing money. And it wasn't like, I didn't just like throw my hands up one day, but like when I was confronted and like it was kind of pulled out of me, I made the phone call for the first time. I set up a ride for the first time. I asked them not to talk to my parents about money for the first time, and like I would figure out how to pay for it. And that's the only time I ever did that. And the whole like what Eric just said about like you're a junkie, you're a loser, like I thought he's like reading my mind. Like I was like that for 10 years. You'll never be as good as your father. You'll never do this. And it was all self-inflicted. I never heard that from anybody, but I could never turn it off. And the only time that I asked for help, and I don't even know that I was really willing to receive, okay, you're going to be sober for at least till today. But I was tired and I thought I would give it a shot for a couple of weeks. So I was like willing to accept the ride. I was willing to accept, the meal that I ate when I got there, the medicine, and a day and then 2 days. And then, you know, I was like, I'm only staying 4 days for detox. And that turned into like 37 days. I wasn't as aware of it. I think now when I look back, I can, you know, grasp certain things. But at that point, it was just like hour by hour, like, all right, I'll go to group. Like, all right, I'll go eat lunch. I'm not going to run down the hill today. So I think for me, it was like don't stop and look around too much, because for me, I would just assume you're going to lose everything and blow it and you're jinxed anyway. So like the second you recognize how good things are going, it's just going to get taken away. So I've kind of just like, you know, I was always taught like you're responsible for the effort, and God or whatever you believe in, like they're responsible for the result. And so I just tried to try.
So I am loving that you guys have completely different moments of that I'm going to do this one action step. I'm going to turn this around, because it's, and I think that this is, I know that this is important. And I actually didn't know that this was going to happen, that you were so different. I think it's so important for people to hear, because so many times they only hear the one, I had this epiphany and I had this moment, and from that moment I never looked back. And which is, that's more my kind of style. I'm like, done, moving forward with this, right? But then there's so many more people that are also like, Dave, I love what you said, that I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm tired. I am tired of being like, and Eric said the same thing. I'm tired of living like this. So I'm going to start right here. And Dave, you're saying, I'll give it a few weeks. Like, and Mary Fran, you talk about that in with 15 minutes, you know, the 15-minute master, just take a small look ahead. And Dave, like you're saying, don't look at everything else. Just focus on what you need to do. If it's 15 minutes, 15 hours, 15 days, it's not, don't think about, so many of us, I mean, like me, I look at the whole journey and I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to get there. So forget it. You know, and I think that I honestly think that's happening a lot to kids like in college right now. So many kids are leaving after the first year, or they're just quitting things because they don't think that they have it in them for the long haul. And you don't have to do it like that. I love this. Let's just chunk it a little bit at a time. Let me get off of this park bench, out of Center City, and somewhere else that I can rise from. And Dave, you said that so eloquently, even though I know you set it up that it wasn't going to be educational. It was very eloquent, though. I love that you said that. So interestingly enough, and I'll let Mary Fran jump in on this. I'm sure that you were listening and pulling out all of our stuff, the try, all of those things. So you dive into that for a second, the stuff that you heard there with your skills and tribe and all that we talk about.
Well, I think, you know, when Eric talked about putting up your hand and asking for help, I mean, we talk about that all the time. And I think the thing that's challenging is, you know, as the parent of an addict, you want to help, but as David and Eric both said, they're ashamed, they're horrified by their own behavior. They can't ask you for help because they don't want you to know, even though you know. It's just such a complicated mixed bag of emotional trauma on every front. And I will say this, I have said this before, that when David was in rehab for the second time, we went to see him and we saw his therapist, and it was a great meeting. And he said, you know, Art said this to me and Art said that to me and blah, blah, blah. And it was all I could do. It's a wonder my mouth didn't bleed. I was biting my tongue so hard because I'm thinking to myself, I said all those same things over and over and over again. But you have to get, I think as the parent, you have to get out of your own head enough to recognize that if they need to hear it from somebody else, you have to allow that. You have to encourage that. Mm-hmm. If your role is helping them find somebody else to listen to, then find somebody else for them to listen to. It doesn't have to be you. And, you know, what David said about, I'm just going to do the next thing. He and I have had this conversation where in recovery, one of the things they say is you just do the next right thing. So you're not taking on this whole journey. And, you know, we talk about crises and challenges. They often hit with such a huge punch that you think it's going to take a huge solution to fix it. And it doesn't work that way. What works is taking those little incremental steps. The sucker punch may be huge. The solution is more in these small individual little steps that you can then build on. And I mean, I'm listening to both of their stories, and that's what I'm getting out of it. I come back to David. One of the first things that I remember, and I tell everybody that he did that made him really feel good, was the day he went out and bought his own personal care products. Like, he came home one day with Q-tips and shampoo and body wash or whatever and toothpaste, and you'd have thought that he hit the lottery. But it was that one thing that enabled him to feel human again, to feel normal again, to feel productive again. So, and that was early recovery. And that's the part, Eric, you said something that really struck me, that when you first got sober, your brain was still screwed up for a while. And I always say to people, David may have gotten sober like in 2011, but he was not all right in the head in 2011. It still takes time. That's a journey too.
Interesting. I'm one of those people that I don't have a addiction journey, but I have a journey in self-talk that I wouldn't have any friends if I talked to them the way I talk to myself sometimes. And I've learned so much, especially this year through this show, of all these strategies to stop doing that. And then when I do it again, I'm like, what is the matter with you? Like, do you have days like that all these years later where you do you feel yourself spiraling back into old habits, and then like you got to like, do you snap yourself out of it, or are you on such a path now that you don't even go back into any of those dark thoughts and moments? And if that's too deep and personal, you don't have to share that.
No, it's not too deep and personal. Did you want to go, Dave?
No, go ahead.
The answer is yes. I think it comes more in the form of like self-doubt. Like, every time I kind of achieve something, this quote imposter syndrome. So it's more like that. Definitely not even close to the way it was during addiction, but little things like that. And I consider it now, I used to view it as like, I got to overcome self-doubt. It's a process. And there's a process. There's going to be good days. There's going to be bad days. I have some really good habits that I built into my day that helped to set me on a trajectory. Can I share them real quick?
Please do.
Yeah.
So I call it it's a bookend system. I try to teach it to as many people as I can because it's changed my life. But basically, first thing when I wake up in the morning, I listen to or read something inspirational, motivational, educational. I typically do YouTube. I like positive motivational videos. So the first thing that goes into my head, because when you come out of sleep, when you're in sleep, you're in delta wave, very slow frequency. As you're coming to into wakefulness, you're in a very susceptible wavelength called theta wave, and then into alpha, and now we're in beta right now. This is important because from a programming, if you want to reprogram your mind, you hear that thrown around a lot with good things. First thing in the morning is prime time. So when you wake up, go on YouTube, inspirational messages coming in. I'm a coffee drinker. So there's this beautiful moment where the caffeine kicks in and the motivational message, and I just launch and feel great, and of course there's ups and downs throughout the day, but that's a great way to start the day. At the very end of the day, right before my head hits the pillow, my wife and I do a gratitude list out loud. So I'm grateful I don't always make her list, but we always do one. I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for this. Interesting, and gratitude lists have been around forever, but now because of neuroscience, we get to kind of see some of the neurochemical responses that come along with this. Serotonin is released with gratitude, with deep gratitude. Serotonin, the same antidepressant neurochemical it's the satiation. I'm satisfied. I'm happy with what I have. And you could create that neurochemical response. So that was a little long-winded, but I think it's very important. I've established that practice for the past 6 years, and I rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, and I don't miss a day. And it helps me a lot with that stinking thinking thing.
Wow. So I'm going to start with a motivational message. I'm going to drink my coffee, and then I'm going to text Mary Fran. No,
dear
I'm not allowed to
God.
text her till 8 o'clock.
I got to tell you, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, did she tell him what to say? Because she does that exact same thing all the time. That's her habit.
What about you, Dave? Do you have those moments of going back, and how do you snap yourself out of it if you do?
I mean, with what Eric just said, like if it's not the exact same, first I still actively go to therapy. I try to do it 3 times a month. I've been heavily diagnosed with imposter syndrome. Like it's all we talk about. Um, I've achieved certain levels of success and varieties of things, and I'm convinced that it was luck. I'm living someone else's life. I'm really not that good. Everyone's going to find out I'm fake. Um, and then if things aren't good at work, like my wife knows, and so like, do I go like, oh my God, I'm going to go use and get high today? Like, it's been a long time since that. Do I fall back into, beeping my horn too early at a guy driving, or snapping at my kids, or snapping at my wife, or
Your
the
mom.
anger, the talking sideways? Yeah, my
Snapping at
mom.
your mom.
Never.
That's definitely like that's what I work on a lot.
Okay.
And the self-doubt thing, like I think I talked about the last time I was on. My therapist has me I do a feelings worksheet when it's like, all right, you're worried about losing your job, losing your life, losing your house, yada yada yada. Let's go through step by step how likely that is to happen. And I have to write down things that like support the fear as relevant, or like debunk the fear as like I'm just out of my head. Very like probably actually since COVID, I've started doing the positive affirmation in the morning, like Eric said, and meditating. I try to exercise every morning now by 8 o'clock. My wife bought a Peloton when we started getting locked down, and I really enjoy that. And then every night, gratitude and a prayer. It's the same thing that Eric said. Like, what are you thankful for? Thank God for another day sober, and I always say thank God for the things you've given me, the things you've left me, and the things you've taken away from me. And that's kind of it.
Wow.
I'd like to jump in with a really quick observation here from listening to both of you. And David, I can speak to this because I know you, but it sounds like Eric is the same thing. The feelings that you have that are still the things that you work on are probably the things that led you to self-medicate and use in the first place. So the recognition that those are things that are in your persona and that you have to deal with them and that you continue to deal with them, it adds to that idea that we always have, that this is always a process. You don't get brilliantly resilient. You don't land there and stay there. It's just something that you have to constantly be aware of, those things that work in you and work against you or for you, and either nurture or try to suppress them, but make that be a process in your life. So I love that you both have that that routine, more or less, and that it was something that that you're planning on continuing.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating to me that no matter the struggle, no matter the sucker punch, no matter the train wreck, whether it happened to you or you caused it, everyone we've talked to in this, 150, I don't know, bazillion shows and specials and groups, it's so similar. It's
Yeah.
so similar that these are the kinds of things that help you reset, rise, and then move on with your life. And like you just said, Mary Fran, it is a process. See, this is what drives me crazy, and this is why I don't even know how Mary Fran still logs into Zoom with me, because I have this learning curve issue that I'm the slowest learner on the planet. Once I get it, people, but I'm very slow with the learning thing. I kept getting so frustrated this year because I'm like, I have been through this. I know the steps to get myself out of the self-talk. I know, but then I'd find myself doing it again. And I'm like, something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with me. And then, Mary Fair would be like, it's the process. You have to, and you said it just recently. Brilliantly resilient is a process over and over. You go up, back, and you just keep practicing and using all of those strategies.
Yeah.
Not exactly what I was looking for. I want to check the box. You got 100% and move to the next grade.
Yeah, we don't get the quick fix. But if I could just jump in here a little bit, I would like for you guys to talk a little bit about how people can support those in addiction. And maybe this is where the brilliance piece comes in a little bit, Kristen, about how we can be supportive of people in early recovery, because that is a very delicate stage. So how do like family members, how can you be supportive of that? I mean, I know Dave, my husband Dave, and I made certain choices. Like we didn't drink in front of David, and we still don't often do that, just out of respect for where he was. I don't know if that's good, bad, indifferent. I don't know. It was something that we chose to do. But I think that's a really, again, you don't just get sober and your brain suddenly is cleared. You don't make that decision and then the next day your brain's perfectly functioning. And also it's a real up and down place. How would you guys suggest somebody support somebody in that situation?
I mean, I think, I think the one thing is like year by year it changes. Like I think it's super respectful, like to not drink, around somebody like their first holiday home. Um, I also think that if that person is doing the work that they should, I mean, we had alcohol at our wedding. We were both several years sober, but I also, I didn't invite anyone in their first like year or two that it could put them in a weird spot. But, the family shouldn't have to have caution tape forever if the person recovering is doing what they're supposed to do. And I think that's a sign. Like the day that like you're not scared to have a glass of wine at dinner when I'm there is like probably proof that you've been watching me for several years and you're like, he seems okay. So like in the beginning, super respectful. Things evolve and things change. And I think, making the family a united front of like what you'll quote unquote like tolerate, especially if someone's an active addiction, what line you won't cross, and everyone having a united front, and then having just open conversations. I mean, I hated the open conversations of like, is it okay if I have a glass of wine with dinner when I'm like 4 years sober? But in the beginning, like you learn that like the people that, if you're not comfortable like being around alcohol around the holidays, and like your family members that like have an issue with that, like they probably have a drinking problem. Like if it's not that big of a deal, like, and they would rather you around, you're in good company. So I think, you know, taking the journey of like you having self-care and you having a therapist and you listening to certain stuff and having somebody to vent about and complain about, your kid, your loved one and stuff like that is pretty important. But realizing that like really no matter what you do, I mean, you can be supportive, but the kid could still relapse, and you could be completely unsupportive and the kid could get sober in spite of you. So I think it's a matter of like trying to be supportive, but also not making it like it's your cross to bear, because it's not.
Interesting.
I like that.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Eric?
I basically agree with everything that Dave said. I mean, I tend to put the onus, and even when I was in early recovery, like recovery is a very active process. So when I was going to my family, we had a plan, we had a strategy. I was working with guys, people like Dave, like we were making our own plan. The family's making their plan, and then we're meeting in the middle. Self-care on both ends has to be a top priority. Looking back, that was a big part of it. Like my mom took care of herself, and she was able to kind of, of course you want to be respectful and mindful of the environment as far as alcohol, but I mean, ultimately, like recovery is an active process. Like I was actively engaged still to this day. I'm very actively engaged in my recovery. I put it before everything. You're kind of taught that no matter what realm you're into in recovery, that's first and foremost. Put it first, show up with a plan. Empathy goes both ways, right? Like you could be respectful of me, but at some point I want to give you permission to enjoy the holiday. And if that means you having a glass of wine, I should offer that and extend that kindness as well, and not just be expected for everybody to mold around my personal needs.
Exactly.
That was such a good question, Mary Fran, because this whole episode is going to be so helpful. And I think that right there, because everybody feels like, what's the right thing to say? I don't want to walk on eggshells and I don't know what to do. And those suggestions are absolutely fantastic. So I want to, I want everybody to know, I'm going to start with you, Dave. We talked a little bit about what you guys do now when we began, but Dave, I want everybody to know the how long you've been married, the ages of your kids, and what life is like now. The good, we don't need to hear about the what happened before you got on camera. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
It's like, everybody stop. What's going on? But go ahead.
I'm sitting in my laundry room right now, so that's I mean, this is the cleanest spot I could find. The back porch is where I usually work. I got a little space here, but the Wi-Fi is not great. God only knows what's on the other side of the door. I got married to a girl who was like one of my really good friends in high school. We went to homecoming together. We broke up for 10 years, got sober, got back together, my wife Kelly, which is, fairy tale in and of itself. And then we have 3 kids. I have a daughter named Emma, who is 6. I have a son named Luca, who's 4. And the little terror is our daughter Kaya, who's like 1.5. I just, it's crazy. Like, I don't stop and think about it a lot like this. So I'm like almost welled up, but like, there's, I had a lot of buddies that didn't make it, and that some left kids. And I think about that every day, and especially around the holidays. I have some good buddies that had sober time, had kids, and then relapsed. And, it's, I've been given a lot of gifts. I think the only thing I did was not do anything my own way, which I still fight with. But I had a lot of good teachers. And like my favorite saying is like, thank God for the men that cared more about saving my life than hurting my feelings. Like, I had a lot of people tell you, like, you're an asshole, you're selfish, you're arrogant, you're cocky, you're like, unless you change. And I still have elements of all of those things, but like, your life's not going to change just because you're not drinking or getting high. And you attract what you put out. And I think I have a good group of people in my life. My family I'm super close with. I have a lot of good friends. I have a lot of guys like Eric that like, we all are on a quest for greatness, I think. And to have walked through what we've walked through, and overcome it, it's definitely a daily struggle. But like, to anybody that's wondering, like, I say all the time when I'm finished speaking, like, I'm still as self-centered as they come. And if getting high was better than what I have now, I'd be getting high right now. It's just not. It's just, it doesn't get better overnight. But I probably like Eric. I lay in bed some nights, dude, where I don't have restless legs. And that gift, nobody who isn't in recovery would understand, just the fact that your body can be still. And I try to never forget those things. So.
Wow, that's fantastic. Eric, how about you? You said you talked about your wife. What's going on in your life?
Yeah, I have an amazing life. So I've been married for 6 years. I met my wife. I was on with basically a 12-step group trip to the beach in Belmar Beach, and I started talking to her in the ocean. I met her in the ocean and struck up a conversation. She's not in recovery, so she was, very understanding. When I met her, I was living in a recovery house. I didn't have a bank account. I would cash my check and keep the whole entire check in my pocket because I couldn't get a bank account. So I had this amazing woman who just believed in me.
Wow.
I ended up having the opportunity to marry her. My family relationships for a while, like people didn't really want me around my nephew when he was very young, and I was really struggling with addiction. Now I'm the godfather of a niece and a nephew, where like that's stuff like that, and I could go on to all the, I love what I do for work. I'm able to help people in recovery. I created a behavior modification program based on my experiences. I've been able to implement that program with, thousands of graduates. Like stuff like that is, people still reach out to me and are like, man, you impacted my life so much. And that goes like, there's times where I'll just break down. It'll be like a Facebook Messenger thing. And I'm like, wow, and all the other bells and whistles, which is kind of like nice to have, but that family connection, that selfless service, that kind of that's hard to top. It's a good feeling. And I love Monday morning. Monday morning is my favorite day of the week. I like what I do. I get up and I go after it, and I get asked to do cool stuff like this, which I appreciate.
Wow. It's fantastic. You know, it's great to hear. You guys have me in tears, but listening to the joy in your voices, that's why I wanted to make sure people knew what your life is like now, because of the struggles and where you painted the picture of where you started. And so, for those that are listening or have family members that are in that beginning journey on that park bench, looking up at William Penn, with no family around, not knowing what to do, and the beginning of the journey is looking way too long. I love, David, you said it doesn't get better overnight. I mean, this is quite the journey that both of you guys have had, but look where you landed. And then I'm hoping that everybody goes back and listens several times to this, as I will, and pulls out all of those magnificent nuggets that you guys found your tribe. I know that the guys probably don't call it a tribe, a pack, whatever you want to call it. Your people, even if it was just one or two, if it was a parent, a friend, somebody that you were able to go to and ask for help. That's the biggest thing in this, is asking for the help. I think that's always everybody's hardest, whether it's addiction, whether it's divorce, whether it's whatever. And the shame part of the journey is a hard one to get over. So I'm so grateful that you guys went through all of that for us, because I know for me, I took so much from this that applies in so many different pieces of my life, especially as a mom, as my kids struggle with different things, to have that different perception now of what my role really is in their life and is not in their life. So I appreciate all of that. And I want to have Mary Fran do some final thoughts for a sec, but I just want to make sure that I don't forget to say that, David, you also said in the very beginning, what you can do as family members is enable wellness and enable recovery. I think that was absolutely brilliant. So Mary Fran, you have any final thoughts?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm beyond delighted that you both agreed to come on this program, because this is, like I said at the beginning, this is the resource that I didn't have. And these, I learned things tonight, even after all of this time, that I wish I had known back then, but I know now, and can better, serve and help people and guide them to certain things. So also to that end, I want to make sure, Eric, that you mention your book, and we want to tell everybody where to find you guys. So I'll just wind up and say for myself, when David was going through all this and through the worst of it, it was terrifying. It was crushing. It was, I mean, I would venture to guess that everything that he felt, I felt from a different perspective, all of it. I'm sure I felt all of it. But the fact that we somehow, by the grace of God, and I know it was by the grace of God, that we managed to get through it, and that he has the life that he has now. I'm sorry, I get a little verklempt every once in a while, but it's a miracle. And I am very proud of the fact that he can be of service, and he's brought people into my life like Eric, and I've had an opportunity to serve people too. So thank you both for that. And I'd like you both to tell us where we can find you. Eric, tell us about your book.
Yeah, I could go. So the book, if you could see it, is called Reclaiming the Brain. It's a prescriptive book, I tell people. So it's not just information. My whole thing is information needs to lead to transformation. So it's an actual guidebook. I took an N of one approach, which basically means I was the case study in writing it. And I share some stories of some people, of course, with their permission, who I've worked with, and I've been able to replicate the findings. And then in the back are citations to some scientific literature as it relates to what's going on in the brain to these behavior changes that I'm trying to suggest. I think it's a pretty fun, interactive book that hopefully lends some really good insight into what's going on beneath the hood, and how people can truly reclaim that, quote, hijacked brain.
And that's on Amazon, right? Is that where you direct
It's on Amazon. It's also Barnes & Noble picked it up, and Walmart.com, so you could get it on any of those places. Also, I have a company called ERP Health, and it's a technology that helps providers to truly individualize patient care. So you meet people where they're at, identify their unique needs, and treat them appropriately based on exactly what they need at the lowest point in their lives. So
Awesome.
ERPhealth.com if you want to check that out.
That's awesome.
Great. Dave, how can we find you?
Well, first, ERP health, I've been doing a little bit of work with Eric and really want to advocate for the program. Quickly, the way that I met Eric, I don't know if you remember this. It was in Cherry Hill at the office. You were supposed to be flying to a competition that your flight got canceled. You came back to the office and we were like in front of a chalkboard and he starts like ERPing like my life. And he's like, so like, here's a scale from 1 to 10. Like, have you called your family today? And I'm like, bro, I'm here for like kind of a job interview, but like I didn't know it was a job interview. I mean, like the Jeff cap and like painter shorts while my wife and kid are at the Camden Aquarium. And he's like, well, so like, have you been to a meeting today? I'm like, who is this guy? but that program, it's just unbelievable what he's created. And I think that it's helped so many people, and to be able to, be on one of these things with him is really a privilege. So I work at a treatment center called Dream Life Recovery. I'm pretty active in the recovery world. I do some behavioral healthcare stuff with my father, who's a recruiter. And I try to be as accessible as possible, just on a human level. And I think that, regardless of what treatment center people go to, the important thing is that you get the help that you deserve. And there's a lot of good people that do similar stuff to Eric and I, and just reaching out is the most important thing. So, I mean, you can find me on Dream Life's website. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about recovery, help, advice. And it really doesn't matter where you go for treatment. It just matters that you do go.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for an incredible hour. This has been so enlightening on so many levels. And I want to finish by saying this. Mary Fran and I always say that these sucker punches and challenges and things we didn't plan for, we never consider them a blessing, that, they've come into our life. But what the blessing is what you've done since then, and now blessing so many other people's lives. And I'm watching as we're recording this on Facebook, and I want everybody to go into the community and see the comments and the cheers and the thank yous for everything that you guys shared tonight. And I echo all of that times a million. This has helped so many people, and I appreciate you taking the time, especially at a busy time of year, to do this for us. So thanks so much. And everybody, make sure you go out and check out Eric and Dave and Mary Fran. Reach out to all three for help in addiction and recovery journeys. Go to brilliantlyresilient.net and you can find resources there for all of your reset, rise, and reveal your brilliance challenges, support, whatever it is that you need. And we'll see y'all next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you
so much for having me.
Thank you.